Hi everybody, my name's Carla and I'm an alcoholic. And I want to start by thanking Judith for the opportunity to come out here and share with you guys this weekend. It's a real privilege, and you know, sometimes you hear people, you hear a speaker, you know, the stars align, it's the right speaker, they say everything that just makes me want to join AA all over again. You know, I'm 31 years sober and I want to join AA all over again. You know, the speakers have been just phenomenal, and I love that word too. I learned that word here, I think. And I want to thank Lexi for coming out in the cold and picking us up from the airport and bringing me breakfast and just being in my life. I think that one alcoholic talking to another is probably the best thing going. I think it's just it's the best. And if I didn't do that, I wouldn't have anything to say up here to you. And Lexi's been a little part of my life in that way. And I just thank God for these opportunities. And let's see, the committee for putting all this together. Something's happening in North Dakota, you know, and you know, it takes a spark, and it's just something beautiful is happening. And I know a few of you. I know Judith and what's happened with her, starting from her, but then the ripples that have come out from there, and the women that she's helped, and then the women that they're helping, and then the women that they're helping, you know, generations already, and it doesn't stop. And what I love, and I'm going to say a couple of things too that, you know, I'm not here to denigrate Bill Wilson, but I am here to say, you know, that what he had was accessible. That's what they wrote down in this book. They didn't say, hey, if you do this stuff, then one day you'll be able to call somebody and they'll know a friend who had a sister who had a spiritual awakening. They didn't say that. They said, if you do this, what we did, you'll get what we got, or some version of it. You know, it's accessible. I wouldn't want to play if I couldn't have what you have. I just wouldn't want to play. I wouldn't last that long. But you've made it accessible to me. You know, and I have to laugh. You know, early on in Bill's story, he says, God comes to some men God comes to some men slowly, but for me, his effect was sudden and profound. And I take exception to that, because I just read pages of his story where it was like 10 years before that. He was in the Winchester Cathedral in London, and he was much moved in that cathedral. He was much moved before he even went outside, much moved by something was happening. And he felt that. You know, and I feel like that's how Spirit has been for me since the beginning. I've not been unaware of Spirit or anything like that, but man, alcohol just intervened in a way and just was so immediately accessible. It just kind of knocked Spirit out of the box, you know. And I was reading with a lady who had just about 90 days sober, and we got to that part in the book, and it says, you know, where God comes to most men slowly, but on me, his effect was sudden and profound, or something. I'm paraphrasing. And she goes, no, he didn't. We just read. We all had to take a walk. We all had to take that pre-first step walk. Some of us are still doing it. Some of us are in this room now doing it. And I don't care if you're doing it in here. AA is so accessible now that a lot of people end up doing their pre-first step work in Alcoholics Anonymous, but we had to get there to get here. And for me, I've always believed that there is a God, and I say that because even believing and I don't always call it God. Most times I call it the power that is, because I don't understand it, and I can't define it or comprehend it most days. I get to experience it most days. But I have always known it existed, but there were many, many years when I drank anyway. So having that awareness of spirit is only one thing, and I know we talk a lot in Alcoholics Anonymous about, especially when we're new, why am I an alcoholic? Why did I drink? And there is a certain amount of that. I need to keep a level of spiritual fitness going on, but I also need to remember that there is never going to come a day where I am so spiritually fit that I can take a drink. Never, not on the best day of my life to come, can I have a drink of alcohol in any form at all. My big book never stops talking about that. And so for step 10, continuing to take personal inventory and when we were wrong, promptly admit it, I think belies what actually happens for me in step 10. What it says for me is, for all of us, this thought brings us to step 10, which suggests we continue to take personal inventory and continue to set right any new mistakes as we go along. We vigorously commence this way of living as we cleaned up the past. We have entered the world of the Spirit. So we, awakened. The first 9 steps bring an awakening. Don't even have to wait till 12, but somewhere along the line in 1 through 9, we've been doing a little bit of 12, right? I've been pouring coffee. I've been sharing with the newcomer. I've been stacking chairs and greeting and talking one alcoholic to another. Lots and lots of mini 5th steps happen in the car on the way to the meeting, right? Or at the coffee afterward. And so but now I've come to trust the process. And you heard all the speakers before lead us up to this point. And just, I guess I should let you know I belong here too. When I discovered what alcohol would do for me, I let it. I know a lot of people came in here later at having already built and lost great empires, having already established themselves in society as something, and that's just not my story at all. I think Paul talked about that last night. I was great. I had a musical talent. I loved to write. I was academically gifted. I was great at sports. I was like. I had a lot of fun in my life. I was had a lot going for me, and until I was about 13, and then it was all downhill from there till about 29. But because when I discovered what alcohol would do for me, I let it. It became my growing up muscle. It became the thing that made me feel connected to you, and it became the thing that made me feel buffered from you when I needed it. And it was my emotional health, it was my spiritual health, and it fit right in there where God should have. But it created and preserved many, many illusions for me. And I have no doubt that it would do that for me today for about 20 minutes, and then the sky would be falling. My friend Kent says that if he took a drink today, that he knows that a cop would fall right out of the sky and be right in front of him. And that was sort of how it was for me at the end. So I've entered the world of the Spirit, and I just, for me, step 10 is 1 through 9 all over again. And that's just the short version of it for me. This is not an overnight, our next function is to grow in understanding and effectiveness. This is not an overnight matter. It should continue for our lifetime. Continue to watch for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. When these crop up, we ask God at once to remove them. So we've got 4, 5, 6, 7. We discuss them with someone immediately and make amends if we've harmed anyone. 8 and 9. Then we resolutely turn our thoughts to someone we can help. There's 12 in there. Love and tolerance of others is our code. And I don't know about you, but when I came here, I read that to mean we solicit love and tolerance. We don't develop it. And now I've got it turned around, I think, trying to develop a little bit of that. But I hear it all the time from newcomers. Whatever happened to the love and tolerance? And we've ceased fighting anything or anyone, even alcohol. For by this time, sanity will have returned. That promise of the 10th step. We'll seldomly be interested in liquor. If tempted, we recoil from it as if from a hot flame. We react sanely and normally, and we will find that this has happened automatically. I took great exception to that for a while until I realized I think what he's saying is it's happened automatically now that I've taken the first 9 steps. But now I just got to do it again. I'm going to do it again. It's a lifetime process. I'm going to do it for the rest of my life. And And I think what I want to say is, well, most of the stuff I go through is not different from other human beings. You know, I have emotions like every other human being. I don't like to mix up my emotions with other people. We are not a different species. But what's at stake here, he reiterates, like in the passage that Carolyn read, and I just think it's so important, is that the reason that I'm doing this, the reason that I continue to treat my spirit, is because alcohol is a subtle foe. And if I don't, somewhere along the line, the darkness of alcoholism, the insanity of alcohol returns for me. Because for me, when it gets dark, my head says, go get a drink. And when I take a drink, when this alcoholic takes a drink, it takes the next. And then I'm off and running. And that doesn't happen to 90% of the population. They can have a bad day, they can go smoke a cigarette, they can go have a drink. They can sit back, relax, have a great meal, and then forget about it the next day. That doesn't happen to me. And like Bill said yesterday, you know, for one night, if I had that expense account at work, one night, just a freebie, I would have lost that job. I'd be in jail. I'd wreck cars. It'd be gone. It'd be over. That's what alcohol does for and to me. So I need to remember, I never want to forget what the stakes are here. And so I get a little bit nervous when I hear somebody about 2 or 3 years sober saying it's not about the alcohol. And I know what you mean. There's so much more that we have to do when we get here than put down the alcohol. The obsession to drink alcohol didn't leave me till I was about 9 months sober. You know, it was just on me every day. And my circumstances when I got here were a little bit better than they had been for a long time. I turned my first trick in San Francisco when I was 14 years old. And before that, there had been a lot of sexual abuse. My whole being seemed, my whole currency, the currency of my being was surrounded or was steeped in that, in of a sexual nature, you know, and it took me a long time and a lot of inventories and a lot of twisted thinking, a lot of questioning. And I thought that's who I was. And I was locked up as a kid. I went into a mental hospital and right before then had a little party with about 23 hits of LSD. So I really had a reason to be in a mental hospital when I finally got there. And I was there for a year and then in a rehab. And nobody knew what to do with Carla. And I'd get thirsty enough and I'd find my way out of those places and I'd hit the street for a week or two and I'd be right back doing what I knew to do because I had no alternative as far as I was concerned. And while alcohol was a terrible storyteller for a while, after a while, in the beginning it was great. You know, it lied to me and it did it. And it wasn't like and this has been said too already, I'm just going to repeat a lot of the things that's already been said because it's my experience and it's just sort of what happens with us. It wasn't like I looked at my father and wanted to break his heart. It wasn't like I didn't want to mean it when I said, yeah, I'm going to be better. You know, I'm not going to do that again. It wasn't like I didn't mean it or want it to happen. And it just wasn't, just after a while. And I never I didn't go back home for very long anyway, except for a little time in between juvenile hall and a girls' home to stay with my mother for just a little while. And when I left that girls' home and I was on the search for spirit. You know, but I drank and I searched for spirit. And I read beautiful texts today that I read all the time. I read all the time still, but sober they mean a whole lot more to me, and I can utilize them because alcohol's not in the way. I didn't even know that everything I was putting into my body at the time, trying to solve my problem, trying to access that power greater than myself, were the very things that were blocking me from that power. The power that is, that power that informs everything. I don't know what it is. I was born into a Southern Baptist family, and that religion worked very well for my mother till the day she died. And so I'm not And I used to make those jokes about being a recovering Baptist and a recovering, all of those kind of things. But I don't make those jokes anymore because I realize that they've all been part of something. They've all been part of some awakening, and they're a part of somebody's awakening right now. And so I'm more of an and lady now. But back then I tried a lot of things. I tried being a Catholic for a couple of weeks in the 4th grade. But I'm about as deep as a mud puddle. If things aren't happening right away, I got to go. Just try something else. And I knew this about myself when I got here. When I got here, it wasn't like I needed to be convinced of much of anything. I knew that you couldn't use the word Carla and good character in the same sentence. I knew that. I also knew that I wanted to be a much better mother than I had ever had. I knew that. We learned that in therapy. We got to break the cycle. We got to be a better parent than we had. And when I had my daughter, when I was living up on a mountain in a roofless cabin on a mining claim with a plastic roof, and our spiritual advisor who lived in the plastic tent up the hill, and I had this little girl, and I'm getting my clothes and shoes and the necessities of life out of a box behind a store in town, thinking that I'm going to be a better parent than the one I had. I'm delusional. And in the meantime, drinking moonshine and homemade wine, and they're organic and much better for you. But it felt like it was solving the problem. It felt like it was doing it. And I didn't know anything about having an obsession of the mind for alcohol or an allergy of the body to alcohol. I didn't know about that. I never bellied up to the bar saying, "Yeah, bartender, that obsession of the mind's been on me all day. I really need a drink." But be careful, because as soon as I have one, the phenomenon of craving is going to set in, and I'll probably be here all night. I didn't know anything about that. I just know I'm probably going to drink. When my circumstances got a little better a little bit later on, I married my drinking partner, and we moved indoors on kind of a regular basis. We became the neighborhood entertainment. And the way we settled our arguments was to grab the shotgun. Whoever got to the gun first won. And that's how we roll. And my circumstances were better, and I couldn't stop drinking. I listened to alcohol So when I am all over the place, but so when I got here, I couldn't lose the obsession. I couldn't lose the obsession. So I'm just living proof here that I am somebody who that you can stay in Alcoholics Anonymous and stay sober for 9 months and not really feel like it, based on the fellowship, based on that window of grace. I don't know how long your window is. I don't know how big your window is of being able to come in here and just pour coffee and just stack chairs and just come to meetings. I came to meetings and I did feel better, but I went to a lot of meetings, and I heard that you had something. I thought you were a little more social than I was inclined to be, so I was afraid I might not be able to get that. I would come into a meeting and somebody asked me if I would make coffee with them, and I thought, dang, somebody thinks I'm going to be here next Tuesday, so I'd say yes, and I'd show up. Those things kind of gave me a winch. They hung on to me and they pulled me out of the mud, and I'm still prone. No, prone is not the right word, but I still have had depression. My sobriety date, September 25th, 1987. I know I didn't say that. And over time, once in a while, I will get into a bad depression. And these things, this grace, the grace of having a meeting or having to meet a sponsee or needing to be somewhere at some point has pulled me up and out of them. Even sometimes, sadly, at places like this, when I'm going through one and I made the commitment to show up and then showing up anyway and not really working that through. And so I don't know how much grace we had, but I had to start working the steps. Right about 9 months sober was when I was in the middle of making my amends to my family. And it was that first round of amends. It was certainly by far not over at that first discussion. It was, but I noticed that after I made that first declaration of the harms I had done and the things that I knew I needed to do and be in order to make amends for them over time had been done, and then there was a long period of reconstruction ahead for my daughter. During the time that I was drinking, my daughter was almost 4 years old at the time, and I had gotten a job tending bar in Hollywood, and it was, the bar business was just where I worked. I had been institutionalized, before and not really able to live out in the world. I had been like living in the shadows and off the side of the road and like out of the light. And then it was time to take care of this little girl. And so I got a job in the bar business, and it never occurred to me not to drink on the job. I mean, why else would you have that job? And it just seemed to me to be cosmically effective. And I'm always God conscious here, I'm conscious of the way the universe works and synchronicity and all of those principles that I can't touch. I can see, but I can't touch. I can't access. So I see them. I get this beautiful job in Hollywood, making great money, and my daughter was almost 4 years old, and every afternoon I used to kiss her goodbye and take off for the bar and go to work and drink with everybody till the wee hours of the morning and crawl back home and start all over again. And one afternoon I kissed my girl goodbye like I had done. We're renting a little room for my aunt out in Covina, and one more day I kiss her goodbye and I take off for the bar in Hollywood, and I get thirsty about Arcadia about halfway to work, and I pull in on Huntington Drive and into the first cabin, an old bar that everybody liked to go to, and have my afternoon shots of Cuervo Gold and Bud Backs, those shots that got me ready to go do my shift in Hollywood, sit there for a little while and get up off the bar stool and go to work and start all over again. And one afternoon I kissed my girl goodbye like I had done, and then I got thirsty again about Arcadia, on the way to Hollywood, pulled in Huntington Drive, first cabin, pulled in, shots of gold, Bud Backs, and to this day, I don't know what was different on that day from the day before except for 24 hours, because I didn't hate the job I was going to, and I didn't love my daughter any less on that day than I love her today. But I sat on the bar stool that day and I drank those shots, and this time I couldn't stop. The thought of going to work, a job I loved, wasn't enough, and the thought of going back to this baby, to this little girl who I loved, who was my life, who I was going to make it better for her than I'd ever had it, better for her. And I couldn't get to her either, so I sat on the bar stool and I lost them both. And I started living off the kindness of strangers there in that little area. And after a while, the strangers weren't so kind. I just, after a while, they say pretty girls aren't usually homeless, but I don't think that's true. Or maybe I just wasn't pretty anymore either. And homelessness, like Bill said, is not necessarily the mark of alcoholism. There are a lot of people out there who aren't necessarily alcoholic. Some of them are mentally ill. And so, it's not good. So I needed to make amends to this kid. So when it was time to come and make amends to this kid, it was time to show up and be there and never, ever, ever have her worry about why her mommy isn't coming home, because I'd stopped calling her to find out how she was doing because she kept asking me those hard questions like, Mommy, when are you coming to get me? And I had no answer for that. And even though I got her back before I got sober, I'm still drinking. I'm still in my alcoholism. And to the day that I got sober, which was just a couple of years later, she was almost 10 years old. Like I said, I was living indoors for a little while. We had had one more of those fights where the cops are in the driveway one more time and the neighbors are watching us again. The gun we've got out. My kid's standing in the corner and she's scared to death. And she's wearing those old clothes like I dressed her in, and she's hardly been paid attention to. And she's standing there with that look in her eyes, and I can't tell her it's going to be any different. And it's happening again and again and again. And here we are again on a Saturday morning, and the cops are there. And the husband left for the last time. The cops left. They took the gun. And it was me and the kid and the booze. But we're living indoors, you know. My circumstances were better. And I think my point is here, too, that, you know, there are people who will never outdrink their money. They will never feel the consequences of their drinking by losing what they have. And they'll be just as alcoholic as we are, just as alcoholic as I am. So they took the gun. And here's the difference between me and a hard drinker. A hard drinker would take a look at their life right about then, and they'd say, you know what, I am really tired of this. I am so tired of this. And they would maybe even have to go off to a detox for a week or two, but they would come back home, they'd go back to work, they'd have a story to tell if somebody asked them, and then they would move on. They would move on with their life, and they'd just move on. Me, what I did as an alcoholic was I just pulled the 12-pack closer to the couch so I didn't have to keep getting back up to go get another drink. And I was drinking beer at the time because I had been to one AA meeting, gone to my first meeting of AA with black eyes and broken ribs, and listened to this woman say that somewhere during her drinking career she switched to beer, so I did, you know, on her recommendation. And so this was about 90 days before I got sober for good. A little more than that, I think. I didn't know, my first sponsor told me if I wanted to affect a conscious contact with a power greater than myself, that maybe I could start back by counting the coincidences that happened in my life, you know, and this was not new to me either, but I hadn't done it in so long, you know, and that's really the trick, is that knowing about these concepts and principles are one thing, but practicing them and keeping them in my life and keeping a working access to the power is another. And so step 10 for me is rubber hits the road. It's a continuing, and why I would think that I wouldn't be living a regular, a normal, my sponsor Marguerite used to call it, you know, sometimes there are just oatmeal days, you know, where you're just getting up and turning off the alarm and going off to work, and it's just like that. You know, why do we need a parade every day? But, you know, I mean, for a while it seems like staying sober deserves a parade, but only in my head. So the 10th step, somebody asked me earlier today, how do you do a 10th step? Is it that review that we have on page 86 at night where it says, when we retire at night, we constructively review our day? That's part of the 11th step, and that's for Michael to talk about tomorrow. But for the 10th step, for me, I've done 4 and 5, and now I'm going to continue that process into my daily life. And sometimes that means I'm not going to have time to run over to the table and sit down and write it out. Some of my 10 steps are written, and when I write one, it looks just like the 4th step. I've got a 4-column resentment inventory, and I attach the 4-column fear inventory to it, and then I do the 9 questions on page 69, because now I'm not just talking about sex, I'm talking about relationships. And that is gotten fuller for me over time in that way. And what steps 6 and 7 I've digested over time. For me, the line that Bill Wilson drew from 2 paragraphs in the big book to 13 pages in the 12 and 12 on fear and how it's a chief activator of all my defects of character, how I'm driven by fear or led by spirit. Right here, step 10, or really after step 9, I've been introduced to a way of life that I'm just going to have to keep on practicing. And I just never want to forget the stakes. And I know I started to say this earlier. I never want to forget I never want it to not be about the alcohol. And we do have to keep our spiritual fitness, but people that forget that it's not about the alcohol, that the stakes for me are that first drink, are people who I've seen who have had 11 and 12 and 41 years of sobriety forget that it's about the alcohol, at least for us. Because in every other respect, I'm very much more like non-alcoholics in their humanness than I am different. But I am different in a very important way. I'm bodily and mentally different because I'm allergic to alcohol in a very deadly way. And so I watch what I eat, and I ask if I'm not sure what's in. I can't safely digest alcohol in any form at all. And that means cough medicine form and food form. And I don't know who puts food in their alcohol anyway, but some people do. And it's just, it's just weird. And or mouthwash form. I don't know how much grace I get in that. I'm not going to even try to say that in 31 years I haven't had some kind of something in my gravy or something like that, but I am cautious. And I don't think that I get, and if I believe in the phenomenon of craving, then that also means that I can't go to Sunday service and have the sacramental wine. And I know people that do, and they claim spiritual fitness, But I guess my whole point is here that as spiritually fit as I get, I can't do it. I'm not going to trust it. If I believe in the phenomenon of craving, and I might be allergic to a lot of other things, but I have never, I have never, held up anybody in the produce department, trying to get them to buy me strawberries, or I just, it's just never been that hard for me to let go of any other allergy. But alcohol, even though it did so much to me, I was just willing to walk through that because of what it did for me. And the only reason I'm not drinking today, the only reason I came into AA was that it threw me away enough that the pain of drinking was bigger than the pain of getting sober. At least I became willing to try. And I came in and like I said, I didn't understand allergy of the body, obsession of the mind. I came in knowing I had a problem with alcohol. Bill calls it a drinking problem. To the layperson, it just makes sense. It's what I was doing. I couldn't drink and I couldn't not drink. And I didn't understand the obsession, I didn't understand why when my husband and I were together, I always thought I made up this rule because we start making up rules, and I had made up this rule that if he brings up drinking first, then I can drink because it's his idea, and I got to go along with, to keep the peace. And so when he would say, let's stop in the office, which was a bar, so, you can always say I'm at the office, and he'd say, let's go by the office and check the football scores. When he'd do that, my insides would light up, and I would be like, and I just really thought I started liking football, I thought it was that. And go in and get drunk every time. So the reason that I keep doing this is, I don't do it once and get a pass, and the reason I keep doing this is that all of these steps protect against the first half of the first step. I come in on that. That's what drove me in. That was the impetus. A lot of other, almost 300 or probably now 300 other fellowships that use our steps as a means of recovery. But that first half of the first step was the impetus that drives me in. I can go to an OA meeting and have a cookie. I can. So I shouldn't be sponsoring anybody in OA. Not like that. I can't identify like that. But I can identify with, man, I just came in for one. I just went in to take the edge off, and then like 100 yards past edge off, closing down the place one more time, going home with so-and-so one more time. And this process keeps me awake. taking these steps every day. There's always a step 2 situation. There's always, and I love that it was said that we can't schedule a spiritual awakening for anybody, but we do this, and in the process, the light gets in. And I believe that for me, for any of us, that before we got here, the light was trying to get in, and sometimes it did. Sometimes it did, but this step 10 maintains the new order of things. It preserves that spiritual awakening. Like I started to say in the very beginning, a lot of us have had spiritual awakenings, spiritual experiences before we got here, but I couldn't maintain it. I couldn't stay anywhere near it, and neither could Bill. Much moved. He was much moved at Winchester Cathedral, but when he took a drink a little later on, that took over. It took over. And for a long time, it feels like we're having like Carl said, a spiritual awakening, a spiritual experience. Even just to feel just regular, even just to move on into my life and start living it. All the while deteriorating. And the only sustainable recovery that I've found after all of the lockup and after all of the skidding around on the outside, I came here at 29 years old, and it is the only reason that I've been able to stay sober 31 years. Anything I ever learned spiritually or psychologically, therapeutically, in any of the places where I was locked up, I always left there when I left. It stayed there. Alcoholics Anonymous is the thing that goes with me out the door. It walks right out with me. 4 a.m, I got something. And sometimes I have to work out resentments. This comes in so handy as time goes by, and sometimes it's the broken shoelace resentments, like she looked at me funny, or why are they going to lunch together and not inviting me, and why are they, at work. It took me a long time to understand that people half my age didn't want to go to work with grandma, and or sober grandma at that, Sometimes those stick in my craw a little bit. They don't, but I've got this process. And there are times I have to write out the 4-column inventory. And when I was 5 years sober, I guess this is my most, I don't know. When I was 5 years sober, I was raped by an intruder in my apartment. He came in through the kitchen window in the middle of the night, and I was 5 years sober. And I don't think consciously I ever thought that if I'm working 12 golden steps that something like this would happen, right? People who never drank have things happen. But this was happening, and there's this guy on me in the middle of the night, and he stayed a few hours. He tied me up. He had a knife, and it turned out that I knew him, and I'd actually watched him get sober 30 days before I did, and I watched him get his life, his wife, his kids, and everything back, and then I watched him join the church and leave AA behind, and when he went out, that was it. And what I learned from that, again, is what I've been trying to say, is that, while the big book tells us to be quick to see where religious people are right, we treat our obsession and our allergy with the spirit. I treat the spirit and I get better. But I'm not one of those people who can go home after a Sunday sermon and have a glass of wine. I can't do it. I am not like them. And this is what brings me into meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous 31 years later, so that I can sit and talk with the newcomer and be reminded with my eyesight, with the smell of the booze still on them that they can't let go of yet, because they haven't come to trust the process of these steps. And he forgot. He forgot. He had, 4 or 5 years of sobriety, and his wife died at about 3 years sober, and then he stopped doing this. He stopped doing it, and he had no mental defense against the first drink, and he ended up going out, and so there was a trial that followed, and I just kept doing this. But the third column here, the third column of the 4-column inventory really helped me out, because if I'm honest, if I'll sit and I'll take the time and see how this affects my pride and affects my self-esteem and affects my ambition, affects my personal relations, or how I believe, really doesn't always affect it the way I think it is, but how I believe it's affecting those areas of my life. And I sit and take a look at them. I did several of those third column inventories of what I thought this guy took from me. He scared me. And even one of the underlying beliefs that I started out with here was that maybe I am just one of those ladies that's always going to have some kind of trouble like this in her life. Maybe that's just what I'm destined for. Maybe that's how it's going to go for me. And I even thought, well, maybe God will use me. And I believe that God's used this story a few times. But I don't think God pointed it at me. You know, I used to hear those stories like, yeah, God's doing it. So did you ever try to do that? Figure out what the lesson is? Yeah, I think God's doing it to show you this. I don't have a God like that anymore. I don't have a God that shoots things at me to see how I'll do with them, because I'll just be dancing every time. You know, I'll just be dodging bullets. I won't know, and after a while I won't care. You know, my friend John says that God is not causation, he's comfort. And so when I started to look for the hope and the help, and I saw those old ideas in that third column of the fourth step, which I use in the 10-step. Like I said, my written 10-step looks just like my 4-step. And the process I go through in my mind is if I have time, most of the time, if I'm really, really pressed in the middle of a conversation, it's what am I afraid of? What's the fear at the bottom of this? What am I afraid of losing? What am I afraid of not getting? And maybe there's one more shorter version of that I didn't even know what it was when I first got sober, but this lady named Susan used to say all the time, you know, breathe through your nose. I think that's a wonderful 10-step. Why? Because it keeps my mouth shut. I didn't know it. I didn't know that in the beginning, and I still use it. Because nothing has paid off for me like the restraint of tongue and pen like Steve so eloquently laid out, you know. I don't always know. I think someone coming at me is the enemy. You know, I still have trouble with you guys being my competitors and not my compadres, you know. And when I fall into that, at least today I know breathe through my nose and the redirecting of my thinking there in that is that's not true. I may not always know what the right thought is, but I do know that this is not true. This is a lie. This is a lie. And while all that was going on, and we had a court trial that followed, and here's where I want to address, and we have ceased fighting anything or anyone, even alcohol. And yes, I stopped fighting alcohol. I stopped trying to get in the ring with it. But during this trial, you know, I stood up. And the first, I had a sponsor up till then. It was a man named Lee who was just magnificent. He was one of those good old boys who said things like, well, that's going to feel a whole lot better as soon as it quits hurting. You know, and when this happened, he came over and he put double locks on my windows. And I'll tell you what, the circle is never unbroken. Carl's sponsee, I didn't know Carl very well at the time, but his sponsee, Dennis, came over and here's how we deal with it. You know, I've got 5 years sober. I think he had 2 at the time, and he had a 9mm pistol, and so he came over and slept on my couch till we found that son of a bitch, you know. And I've since found out he wasn't calling his sponsor at the time, but so as part of the defense, they had a lot of the guys, it was time for me to speak up. It was time for me, my sponsor Marguerite told me that I was going to have to forgive this guy. I was going to have to forgive this guy, and I knew she was right. By that time, I'd gone through the first 9 steps. I knew the process, right? I knew. 4-step, people dominating me, even though they're usually, or many times, usually wrong. I like that. Many times wrong. Even though other people are many, many times wrong. He still owns me. This guy owns me. I'd stand on the sidewalk and I'd hear a car door slam and I would jump and I would get pissed all over again because the guy owned me. You know, and it wasn't even my fault, and he still owns me, and I'm still walking around and I can't be of real service because I'm angry and I'm scared and I'm hurt. And one more time, all those old feelings of that needed to come up, by the way, which, You know, the lightning, if I will allow these events to come and be a lightning rod for all of that to come up, then it will. It will if I'm willing. I have to welcome it, but I don't like it. And it's not supposed to feel good. You know, and just because, you know, doing the right thing doesn't always feel right. And there are some days, too, that I want to say to you, if you're new, that, God, you are going to walk on the sunny frickin' side of the street, you know, and that angels are going to be singing and it's going to be big, you know, and it will be a day that's not really very much different from yesterday, but something's happening inside. And you feel that free, and we get it. And then there are periods of growth where something like this happens, and I can either use it to grow or use it to go. I'm either going to let the events of my life drive me in or drive me out. And if I'm going to let them drive me in, then I've got to assume that I'm going to have to welcome some discomfort. And if I can get comfortable with the discomfort, I'm on my way. And so, going to have to forgive this guy. And that prayer at the top of page 67, which now I just call the prayer of compassion. I don't think it's a sick man's prayer, and I'm like Dawn. That prayer for 2 weeks. It's not a bad prayer. It works if you allow it to bring you to the other side. You know, praying for somebody and hope that guy gets whatever it is that I want for myself, and yay, and all of that. That's great. But if I stay on the spiritual hilltop, though I didn't like their symptoms and the way these disturbed us, they, like ourselves, are spiritually sick. He, like me, is spiritually sick. Haven't I ever been in the middle of something where I hurt somebody because I was so self-centered and so in my stuff? My daughter was one of them. The person I always claimed to love the most got the biggest brunt of me and my illness for a long, long time. And it did get better. And things are, we just continue to, from the time she was about 11 till the time she was 23, that we had some rough times. I had to put her into treatment for a little bit, and I was a grandmother by the time I was 38, and which I love. Those kids now are grown, and the oldest is going to law school, and the youngest is graduating high school, and my daughter's 40 years old, and just received her master's a couple of years ago, and she's a therapist on the crisis impact team at a police department, and she's one of those people who goes into the homes of families in the aftermaths of the events like the Las Vegas shooting and the terrorist act, and helps those people begin to put the pieces of their lives back together, and it's never lost on me that she's adept at crisis impact after a long exposure to me. But I don't take credit for the whole thing. I don't know if she is who she is because or in spite of me. I just know that because of Alcoholics Anonymous, I get to stand here and be a privileged witness. After my first 9 steps were done when I was 9 months sober, or begun, and then I had a few more to make a little bit later on. And then as time went by, more. But I was done with the first round of the process by the time I was 9 months sober, and I'm 31 years sober now. So we just don't stop. We don't stop. We continue this for the rest of our lives. And I'm always seeing things. And some things I can do about myself, and others I can't. And the things, like Pat said, the things that I can't do, I've just got to believe that somehow they're being useful. I've been a really good example in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I have been a really lousy example in Alcoholics Anonymous, and all in the name of good intentions. I have been every kind of sponsor you can imagine. When I was about 2 years sober, I was like, in that stage of work the steps or die. It was a lot of fun. And a lot of fun with little experience, like it was a bad combination. And I've changed home groups. I'm in my 4th home group. It seems like about every decade, it's a new home group. I'm on my 8th sponsor. My first sponsor left AA. Lee's still around. Lee's still a good friend of mine. I still see him. He lost his son about 7 years ago to alcoholism. And I watched him, in a most noble way, get up and see about who he could go find to help during that time. I've always had those examples. And I've softened. When I was 10 years sober, I became one of those parents that after the trial, and the guy was sentenced to 20 years, and I keep missing the story. The whole point of that whole court story was that it was possible to forgive and testify at the same time. Ceasing fighting anything and everyone doesn't mean that I don't stand up and speak. It doesn't mean I don't speak up for myself, and we have to know this. We have to know it, and I have to tell you that in sobriety I kept my mouth shut so many times, thinking that was the rule, or that I wasn't allowed to say something there, and that it would be somehow spiritually wrong, and it's just never wrong. And if somebody doesn't allow me to question something, and I'm not talking about debating, if I'm brand new and I'm just saying, nah, I don't think that's going to work, and I don't want to do it, then don't do it. Between the sponsor and stuff like, that kind of thing. But I'm just talking about, I don't understand why we do that. I don't understand why you're telling me to dress that way. I don't understand. Can you explain that to me? I don't understand why we're lining up like that. A lot of times the answers make sense. Sometimes they don't. And in that court trial, a lot of people were mad at me, and I've had to learn that just because somebody's angry with me doesn't mean I did something wrong. That means that maybe they need to do an inventory. But the difference is I'm not out to get them. You know what I mean? I'm not out to see what they think about that. I'm not going to flick them and then go, ha, what do you think about that? Which I love. We all kind of come in here doing that. I don't care what anybody thinks. What you think about that? And over time, the 10th step has helped me awaken. And as I awaken, I got to go testify in court, and I got to see that I was not who it was I thought I was. And this process of over time of inventory and forgiveness and asking for forgiveness. And then making amends and staying. Like I said, I never want my daughter to worry about where I've been, and I never want my father to worry about where I've been. And when my mother was alive, I had gone away for the weekend, and I had let everybody know where I was, and I'm going to be gone. I'm going to be out of pocket. I'm going to be on the lake. You can't get to me. My cell phone isn't working, and so don't worry about me, but you're not going to be able to reach me. And so I get home from that weekend, and the front window of my condo is broken out, and the manager of the condos comes up and he says, hey, the police were here over the weekend, and my stomach is just doing knots, and the cops my mother from Idaho had called the cops because she couldn't reach me, because she had forgotten that I had told her I was going to be gone. And now I'm like 45 years old, and my mother has called the police because she can't find her daughter, and I'm a little embarrassed and a lot pissed. And I called her, and I'm just ready. I'm just ready, because this time it's justified. Just ready. Who do you think you are? What are you doing? Da, 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 da. And she says, something, Carla, I am not going to apologize. I have buried 2 children already. One is suicide at 17 and the other at 30 years old for drug addiction and alcoholism. And I am not about to apologize just because I forgot that you told me you were going to be gone for the weekend. So let the air out of my balloon right there. And that breathing through my nose thing has really, really helped me, because I don't always know what's going on. There have been many, many times in a meeting I've stood there and thinking, well, that person's never going to be in my life. I'm pretty sure, they just don't ever come by and speak to me, and I don't know why, and I used to think I liked them, but nah, maybe not. And then 2 days later, them walking across the room and asking me to sponsor them. And then I've got to, thank God I didn't blow it before I had the chance to have it turn out something different. And the new way of thinking, because we do learn a new way of thinking. I'm not still afraid of my head. And you might not know it by this talk today, but I'm not still afraid of my head today. I'm not afraid of thinking. The paragraph that Carolyn read ended with that. This is the proper use of the will. I continue to watch for selfishness, self-seeking, dishonesty. And I'm usually any one of those because I'm afraid. I'm self-seeking because I'm afraid. Dishonest because I'm afraid. But I have to step in, and I have to be willing to do it imperfectly. But one of my taglines today is, what if this goes well? What if it goes well? It just might, and most of the time it does. Maybe not in the way I'd like it to, but it usually goes the way it's supposed to. And I've come to trust this process. I kind of take exception when I hear people nowadays saying things like, well, they're not walking like they talk, and I just, from a room full of hypocrites, you know what I mean? When am I always walking like I'm talking, and how do I know they're not walking like they're talking? I have no idea. And I can be concerned by somebody up close to me, and have a little talk with them or something, but to sit from afar and judge somebody, it just gets more and more ridiculous and unsound the longer I stay sober. And so if I am concerned about somebody, I try not to talk about them so much as to just walk up and talk to them and usually find out the real story, even if it's just going to be their side of it. Find out, not in a nosy way, not like I want to get into the gossip, but I mean, are you okay? That kind of thing. And if they care to share with me, that's great. And I'm with you too, Pat. I believe in being a closed-mouth friend. I don't think that anything that anybody shares with me is supposed to be shared unless it's shared by them and me given permission for that. And I had to get sober and practice this stuff for a long time to find out how much these little things really mean. And this stuff isn't easy. Stuff's going to happen. My mother died a few years ago and of end-stage liver disease, and it used to make me so angry to have her tell me how proud she was of me now that I have an answer. And all my life I watched her die of drug addiction and alcoholism, and it just used to piss me off. And over, learning to be kind instead. And I know what it's like to not be able to see yourself. And getting her a big book. I got all my parents' big books, and I have 3 of each. I have 3 moms and 3 dads. So I got 2 of my dads and 1 of my mom's big books, and the big book and the Al-Anon. I said, the big book is about me, and the Al-Anon book is about you. And I didn't want to call my mom an alcoholic, but I said, you might want to read both of them. And it was always for all that time. But because of the 10th step, when my brother died, I got to go up and be the kind of a daughter my mother needed while she buried a second child. I got to go up and be on the other side of the fence there with her instead of ragging on her in the hospital and just berating her and talking to her like a daughter should never talk to her mother. I got to be not really a different person, just the person I was meant to be, dropping off all those things that do not belong to me. And I don't believe that I'm a continual liar, cheat, and a thief, and I've heard that a lot too. I wasn't born a liar, a cheat, and a thief, but I am perfectly capable of doing all of those things when I am afraid. And when I'm afraid and drinking, it is all on. But I'm not destined to be all of those things every day. There is a way out, and there's a way of living happily and usefully whole through the practice and teaching of these steps. And like I said when I first started out this talk, is that my best moments are sitting on the couch taking another woman through these steps, or whoever wants my help. I've sponsored some men over time in certain circumstances. It's not my go-to. It's not what I think is always appropriate, but sometimes it is. And I've learned how to be principled in this program. Because of step 10, I have gotten to change jobs in a graceful way. I got to take a 9th grade education, and because of the 10th step, go work in a place in an investment bank that I never would have walked in the front doors of years ago. I would have had no business being there. And because I went in and I showed up and I asked them what they wanted me to do, and I did it, and I kept my resentments to myself, and I worked on those and practiced forgiveness and made mistakes. I'm not going to work this program and be perfect. What this program does for me is it puts me on the playing field. That's it. That's it, with a whole lot of help and support. It just gets me ready to go live a real life. And man, let me tell you, if you're new, that's a big thing. That's a really big deal for me. And I didn't shoot the lights out in that industry, but I went a long way. And I had a 6-figure income, and because of the 10th step, I got to realize after a period of time that I just didn't want to be doing that anymore, and that I was willing to take the risk of walking away and trying to start on my own. And it took 7 long years, and going back to a trade school and doing that whole thing. And I'm being 57, and I was 57 years old, and in my class, and this kid's sitting next to me. They're all like kids. They're younger than my grandkids, some of them. And he turns to me and he says, "You're like a really cool version of my grandmother." And then last year, I worked for other people for a couple of years, and then last year I went on my own for good, and I took that little leap. And because of the 10th step and staying awake and doing what you taught me to do, it created this, it set the conditions for this business to grow. And now that's what I am. I do, it's what I do. I'm a massage therapist, for real. And I always find it ironic that way back when I never gave one massage ever, but and I get to see my grandchildren, and I met my husband, who you guys who haven't met him will meet next year. He'll be up here, and I was 51 years old and 21 years sober, and all of a sudden we woke up because we're taking these steps over and over and over and implementing these principles in my life, and because of that we got to see each other, and because of him, God, he's been my biggest inspiration, and I was so afraid of it, and because of the 10th step I got to walk through the fear. And I was here last year, and I think I was griping to you about it, how he gets the credit for being so creative, and I'll do the hard work, and then he gets the credit for being so pretty. And what I realized is that I wanted to do it too, and like, God, when I was young, I know that we can't get it all back. I know that there are some things that are just gone for good, but some things just wake back up. Some things never left. The music never left. And I realized that when I moved in with him, I stopped singing. I stopped singing to myself because, well, not to myself. I sing out loud in the house, but I stopped because he had been a professional singer, and it wasn't okay for me to do that. And I started singing again. And singing is not the answer to alcoholism. I'm not saying that, but because of the 10th step, I get to do so much more than stay sober. And I'm waking up again. And then I started doing art. I started making art that was in my head. It was in me. It was this thing that needed to be birthed. And it's this big sidewalk mosaic that's happening. It's a happening. It's really there. And if you stay, you'll start to see what I mean. It's the smallest seeming things. Learning to dance, or learning to show up, or read, or write, or whatever it is in you, And I saw this little Facebook meme that I just really loved, that when the noise inside me when I got quiet, and the noise inside me became the music again. And I remember not even wanting to listen, that the music was too painful to listen to. It just hurt too much. Hurt too much to do that. And because of the 10th step, because I practiced all of these principles in all my affairs to the best of my ability, making mistakes and everything, feeling bad on some days, and having to be okay with that. I feel bad. I had a sponsor one time. I said I was trying to go through this big, elaborate, crappy day I'd had. And he said, "Why don't you just say you had a crappy day? You had a crappy day. So what? It's a crappy day." Sometimes. And that's where, as long as, okay, chalk it up, don't drink, root for midnight, and start over tomorrow. But I have a good friend of mine, I'll close with this, and I have a good friend of mine who had 12 really great years of sobriety. I mean, she was all in. She had a spiritual awakening, and she was sponsoring, and she didn't miss out on anything. She didn't pass anything up. She didn't do anything half-assed. She had 12 really good years of sobriety. And then she began to forget, and she got a little resentment, and she started keeping secrets, and she stopped with this process, and she moved away from being able to see what happens to people who move away from watching and staying together with us. And I don't mean I have to do everything. AA is not the only thing I do. My friend Hector says it's the first thing I do, though. It's the main, it's the foundation on which the whole rest of my life rests. But she stopped, and it's been 4 years, and she can't get past just a couple of days. And her career is moving up. Her life circumstance in that way is moving up, and she's dying. And the last time I saw her in person, I was having to call the paramedics, and it took 6 of them to tie her to the gurney. So it's still really, in that regard, is about the alcohol, isn't it? You know, I've got this, you know, or die the alcoholic death. And I know some of you just went, you know, what kind of alcoholic death? You mean a long one, a short one? I know that I wish for death. But doing these simple steps and going through the boring days and learning to praise them and like them just as much as I like the really, really exciting days, and there have been a lot of them. It's Alcoholics Anonymous, and I want to thank you for my life.